Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to my fourth and final part on Pot Limit Omaha here at Betfair. So as in the previous video, we have one table of 20, we have one table of 50, 20s on the left, with a couple of deep stacks, and we have a table of 50 on the right. Seems to be a good chunk of limping going on in both tables. Flop pretty well on the right-hand table, a limp spot. Given top pair and combo draw, we're just going to lead out in a limp spot. I fully expect my draws to be fairly strong given the passive nature of the pre-flop action. If we happen to hit the flush and get serious amounts of action, then we can reconsider. It's actually quite tempting to pot here given I'm free rolling both straights, and I think the Jack-10 straight is very likely to re-raise me here. I think check raising has some merit, although I'm not convinced that works too frequently. So we're just going to be potting here and attempting to free roll a straight. We chop it up. Going to be ISO raising the Ace King Queen 7, which seems fine. Very interesting to see that the player was limping a hand that week under the gun +1, something we will be taking a note of. Even though this is 50, there still seem to be some weaker players on the site with very loose ranges, very weak passive play pre-flop, so that's definitely something that we're going to be keeping an eye on. It's something we've been noticing and adjusting to in the previous three parts, and although it's a bit surprising to see it at 50, we did see it in the previous video, so it does seem to be something of a trend here. Whereas the first time round I could have potentially put it down to just an outlier, I've seen enough people do it that we are now reasonably confident that it's at least semi-regular at this limit. The hand on the left-hand table that we ISO, we unfortunately flop pretty poorly, so we will be check giving up. Can conceivably continue on 7s and 2-pair cards. Going to check the equity I have on the right-hand table, betting into 2 with a double gut shot doesn't seem fantastic. Would be betting this heads up. I'm okay checking it multi-way, especially when we have the somewhat loose player in the big blind. Unfortunately not the greatest turn card in the world. There's a real chance that our draw is either dead in the form of 10-9, or that the outs that we have are somewhat counterfeited by the presence of hearts. And it should be noticed that we have already tagged Baven. I remember him from a previous video. I can't remember if he was playing 20 or 50, but he seemed a very limp and passive player pre-flop. We're going to be raising up the double suited kings. We have an ace blocker. If either Baven or Joak decided to get 50 big blinds in, I think with the ace blocker we would be just obliging them, given the double suited nature, the blocker, the high pair. As it is, it's not the world's most fantastic flop. That being said, playing someone with a very wide range with backdoor flush draw, we have a 7 blocker, we are going to be betting once and picking it up with a decent frequency. If we happen to get called, we can adjust based on what turns and rivers happen to be. If we get raised, we can just basically assume our opponent has hit top range. It's a fairly disappointing turn card. Completes a good number of 2 pairs, completes a good number of straights. We're unfortunately going to be giving up here. Hands such as 6-4, 8-5, 7-8, all hands that we wouldn't expect to be in a traditional player's range, or not particularly readily. But we saw from Baven last time that he's playing something close to a 70 VPIP style, so all those hands are going to be in his range, so there's not a particularly good need to attempt to bluff a player that doesn't have a fold button. The left-hand table, get a button raise. Certainly could 3-bet, decide to call given the fact that my flush draw is king high and not ace high. It also strengthens my calling range, basically meaning that if I call, I haven't capped my range to quite the extent that my opponents can assume I have. It's not something I'll be doing with a huge frequency, but we're putting it in there occasionally just for the sake of balance, and there is the potential that if we happen to hit with hands such as this, there is a very real chance we can get paid. The question on the turn is whether we bet into our opponent's somewhat capped range. We can assume we're good on turn on flop by the fact that our opponent has checked. Really concerned about king 8 and 9-8, which do exist. We're taking a flop on the right-hand table with my double-suited hand. Absolutely no reason to ISO raise. I would just pick up with the king there, which is far from the worst result possible. Going to be folding the right-hand table. Perfectly happy completing there, but once we completely whiff, we are going to be finding better spots. Left-hand table, we're going to be calling when we have connected nut flush cards. We do have to be somewhat cautious about the under-the-guns range, hence the lack of a 3-bet pre-flop. That being said, it does play reasonably well. Has flopped fairly poorly here, however. And we're going to be falling to a half-pot bet. Right-hand table, we have a double-paired hand, again, out of position. Don't really need to bloat a pot against somebody who is limping a crazy amount of range. Just going to call, attempt to hit a 3, attempt to hit a queen, play for stacks the times we do, give up the times we don't. Seems like a reasonable strategy. The key thing to sort of be very mindful of when you're playing someone who's playing a crazy wide range, etc., is just to be patient and not force the action, not chase too readily. Just be waiting for the spot where your opponent inevitably overplays part of his range. And yeah, that is pretty much where we're going to extract the value from. Unfortunately, we had to fold the double-suited tens. Perfectly fine hand to raise the button with. Once it's raised in front of us, the hand loses a good chunk of value. So again, we're just going to find better spots. Plays far better when we have the lead rather than as a call. You can say that in general about most pairs, to be honest, given the polarized nature of pairs. Going to be isolating here. This player has started limping, and we want to be isolating these sort of players in position. The hand plays reasonably well. It has some connectivity, has some high cards. Flopping average with top pair. Could check. I'm going to bet fold, I think, with my 9 and overs. Do have a queen blocker. It also acts as a club blocker. Turn pretty special, to be honest. Our opponent really shouldn't have 9-8, 9-deuce, etc. That almost certainly raises flop, so the hand I'm worried about is effectively ace-9. I can get paid by worse nines. I can get him chasing hands such as jack-10, 7-6, flush draws. And we just pick up, which is absolutely fine. As turns go, it's a pretty good one. Going to raise connected tens as well. I think it's just about acceptable in under the gun +1 range. Under the gun, it's a little light. If it was double suited, we'd be significantly more excited. Getting 3-bet. Unfortunately, given the nature of the fact that we have 3 spades in hand and that the hand is paired, it's not going to flop so well. So we are going to make a tight fold. We do have position over the 3-better. Hands such as jack-10, 9-8 is going to play significantly better in that spot just because the paired nature of the hand, the 2 tens, basically reduces the number of outs we can hit. It makes the hand significantly more polarized than the mentioned jack-10, 9-8 rundown, which is just going to perform far better. We touched on that in the review sessions we did with a lot of John's history, with flop equity distribution and the like. It seems like the fishy player has called pre with queen 10 6-4 to call a 3-bet out of position, goes with a gut shot and second nut flush draw and gets there. I think he has earned this tag and we are pretty confident in it. Going to be folding to the raise. I'm actually going to be folding this hand out of position. The flush is jack high rather than 9 high. We would be calling. Big blind we'd be calling. It's purely the fact that we're in the small blind and have the worst position of the lot, and we're playing against the gun player who's going to have the tightest range on table, that leads us to make the fold. If we call there, it's not a disastrous call, but I think the fold is slightly better. And getting out of the way when this got ISO raised seems pretty reasonable, given our hand is acceptable but not fantastic. And when we're playing on tables that are very passive, that are going multi-way, we're really looking for hands that are going to play particularly well multi-way, and that's going to be nutted hands, so nut flushes, good connectivity, high cards. Hands like King, Queen, 8-5 are just not going to be connected enough. They don't have nut flushes. Fortunately, the ISO raise comes in from hard action, which is somewhat frustrating given we complete getting a very good price. Hand doesn't play stunningly well multi-way, but if it goes call, all of a sudden I am getting 4-1. I am out of position, but I probably close my eyes, call, and hope for a dreamboat of a flop. That does not qualify as a dreamboat, so check fold is absolutely fine. We're basically calling the ISO there purely because we have such an insane price, and in hot and cold equity we are going to be getting, or very likely to be getting, you know, the relative odds required to make the call. We do have to be somewhat cautious. The fact that we have weak draws in the flush variety, so stacking off multi-way with a you know, jack high flush is going to be fraught with danger. You're raising the double suited hand in the cutoff, totally reasonable. And we're going to be folding deuces on the button. Again, absolutely fine. If the hand's even something like King 10 5-5, just the fact that that is going to reduce the probability of us making bottom set. Not hugely, but significantly enough to make it a profitable open. Deuces are just going to play poorly enough that we're not going to bother with them. Flopping a 6 here and a backdoor flush draw, again multi-way. Not looking to tangle in spots like that. Going to open the ace queen 9-7. Pretty reasonable hand in the cutoff. Does seem like a lot of hands on this right hand table are going to go multi-way. So again, really looking to connect with a decent chunk of equity for us to continue. Backdoor flush draw on gut shot is probably not going to be enough, truthfully. See if we can check, peel, connect in some variety. It's a flop that's going to favour calling ranges significantly more than raising ranges in general. So not something we're thrilled by. We do turn a nut flush draw. Checked again. The problem I have by betting is the 3 largely changes nothing. As such, betting doesn't make an enormous amount of sense with the exception of ace deuce. That being said, on a reasonably passive table, I am going to take a shot at it. Joak, by checking twice, is effectively cap range and saying he doesn't have anything, so we're really worried about hard action, who has thankfully just folded. I guess feasibly we could have a 2-pair on flop that checked, you know, fearful of 6-7, etc., and has now significantly more confidence in its hand, given that it's been checked round and a relative brick comes on turn. Hands such as top pair that pick up nut flush draw can continue as well. So, although we're towards the bottom of our range there, we can occasionally rep stronger parts of hand, and we are betting into cap range, so it does make some sense, albeit not my absolute favourite spot of all time. I think when our opponents are effectively telling us that they don't have all that much in the way of a strong hand, you know, just little probe bets picking up is fine, and if we get played back out, we can, you know, all of a sudden start believing that they do actually have a strong hand, albeit played weirdly even. So in games such as this, where it's very sort of very limpy, very passive, very multi-way in its nature, sort of little probe bets like that, you know, as long as we don't overdo it, you know, we don't have it as a default play, we just sort of mix it in once in a while, are going to be profitable in the right scenarios, and that seemed like a pretty good one when opponents cap range. So all in all, we're okay with it. Left-hand table, got open under the gun. Our opponent had posted. This would have been a big blind to defend once the 3-bet comes in, albeit a bit suspicious that the poster decided to 3-bet to defend. We still have to respect that it's an under the gun raise and a 3-better raising under the gun, then we're not closing action. We have a good hand, but not spectacular. We're not going to overcall. That's very much a losing play. You know, we don't want to overcall, potentially not close action and get jammed on. The times we do get called, we have to connect particularly well because there's going to be an SPR of under 1. So, yeah. To the surprise of no one, the 4-better has aces. Aces with a flush draw, no less. Pretty nice hand. And I assume that was tilt, that 3-bet. Certainly it's a hand, the rundown, that could 3-bet later position raises and show a profit, but against under the gun it's just far too wide. We've touched on before the value of an ace blocker in these instances, and not having one really hurts your 3-bet possibilities. Going to defend the Jack 10 9-4. Going to overcall the queens. Flop relatively poorly. Opponent does have more aces in a raising range than we do in a calling range in general. We do have a 9, some backdoors, but they're very limited. Out of position, we're just going to let it go. And queens on the left-hand table. When our opponent pots, greatly reducing the SPR in his favour, betting into 2 people. You know, with just an overpair, no redraw, we're just going to give him credit and accept that he has a hand. Acceptable hand on the button that we can open. If it is opened in front, much like that, we are just going to be releasing and finding better spots. These 4 videos, although we haven't necessarily been playing in a very flamboyant way, we haven't been mixing it up a huge amount, we are playing in a profitable way. As somewhat condescending as it sounds, and it's certainly not intended to be, you know, playing at the micro stakes, you know, not just in Omaha, basically just playing tight, see hand, find hand, stack opponent is actually a pretty reasonable strategy, given how wide people play with their ranges, how much they overplay, and just you know, general kind of very loose play. You know, we can adjust one of 2 ways. We can either adjust by playing tight and exploiting our range advantage, or we can you know, over adjust and play very loose ourselves, in which case we run the risk of being exploited by others. You know, performing strategy 1 in tightening up and really going hard with their value range. And I think overall, playing stronger parts of range and just going hard when we have the value hand, when we have nut part of range, is going to be significantly more profitable than the sort of getting very loose, very wild, and just attempting to fight fire with fire. Again, we're going to isolate the limp. We have position, we have a pretty good hand. Granted, it doesn't play spectacular multi-way, but that's the point of the isolation, to try and reduce the number of people in the pot. Unfortunately, we have got 1 overcall. Naturally, with kings, I flop an ace. I do have a nut flush blocker, which I could potentially use. I would check most king high flush draws here. Do have a backdoor flush draw. The king is almost certainly good as well. Turning a gut shot is probably not going to be quite the equity I was looking for. And we're just going to be folding here. It's a very disappointing flop for the hand, but showing discipline and just getting out of spots where we have very limited redraws and are almost certainly behind on this turn card is going to be, albeit frustrating, but most definitely the plus EV play. Or the most plus EV play even. Raggedy Queen, absolutely fine to fold. We're going to be folding the somewhat disconnected 3 clubby hand here. Actually barring it going call, which even then we could still advocate a fold. We'd basically be calling just given the sheer enormity of the pot and the price we're being offered. That being said, the stack to pot ratio is altered the more people that get involved. So we're getting 4-1, or slightly better than 4-1. Against my better judgment, I guess we call given that price. This is the issue with the hand, flopping 2 pair and almost certainly having to fold. Our inability to make top 2 pair with a high enough frequency is going to hurt this hand. I don't think the call is absolutely terrible. I would be absolutely fine with the fold as well. It's a spot in which we are generally indifferent, and in general we should be trying to avoid indifferent spots. Once our opponent pots, we can conclude he's either got a stronger hand than us or an enormous draw. We're flipping with the enormous draw and we're crushed by the stronger 2 pair / sets. So as weird and nitty as it looks to fold bottom 2, it's absolutely fine. Multi-way, our opponent really can't be firing that light. Unless we have a particularly good read that he is somewhat loose and mental, frankly. Don't actually see a reason to isolate the kings. They're not stunningly strong kings. We are at a position Don't necessarily need to bloat a pot where I'm not altering the SPR to an acceptable, to an acceptable enough extent. We did touch on that with the last hand of the second part. If this hand had got raised, we certainly would be happier 3-betting than ISOing, just because it's altering the stack to pot and allowing us to play for stacks on flop more readily. We don't have that option in this instance. So raising is just basically opening ourselves up to being played back out on flops such as this. As it is, we're just going to check through top pair. There is a slim chance we're good. I don't see us folding out 2-pair, etc. Weird hand to limp, given how wide he's playing. That's actually one of the stronger hands I would expect him to have. I think we can conclude from that if he's limping hands such as that he's just limping 100% of range. Getting rid of the deuce is even getting a good price. That's just a terrible hand. Likewise on the left-hand table. So whereas the last part of the video we did actually run a decent profit up, we found some interesting spots. This is a video where basically we're just, by the looks of it, with 10 minutes to go, basically breaking even and just, just being patient. If we find any spots to exploit, we most definitely will. But, in general, it's just sort of indicating, that cash poker can be, and not just Omaha, can very much be a grind, and it's critical to be patient and, not spew money away trying to outplay players that don't necessarily think of ranges, don't necessarily have fold buttons, don't necessarily think of hands in anything but absolute hand strength terms pre-flop. And if you see in general, you can see myself and Volty, who is reg on this site at 50. The two of us are generally just sort of being reasonably standoffish and just picking spots. And in general, that's just going to be the best option in these sort of games. They are going to be very, very profitable, but whether they're profitable in a 30-minute recording window is an entirely separate question. Again, folding the junk. Interesting to note this player's limping some range is raising other parts, so I'm going to suspect they're probably not balanced with their limping range. Hence why I've been trying to exploit it, for example, with the kings in position. Opponent posts. Jack's nut flush draw and somewhat connected. We're going to ISO. Try and get this hand heads up. If the big blind with his stack size jams, then unfortunately for 20 big blinds, we're just going to be a rumbling. Pretty big setup on the right-hand table. Going to be folding eights. Unfortunately, we don't steal the button here, which is somewhat frustrating. Flop a double gut shot on a backdoor flush draw. Opponent jams. So there was a case for calling when our opponent jams. Once the rejam comes in, that case is non-existent, unfortunately. With effectively an open ender and double gut shot and backdoor flush draw, there's no reason to continue. And we see a set, which I would question how on earth that overcalled. We see 2-pair. That seems like a very, very loose overcall. Well, partly because it is. Yeah, not an enormous fan of that play. But in that individual instance, it worked. It's just going to indicate that quite a few of your isolations, quite a few of your 3-bets will get overcalled just by people, effectively looking to gamble. That is, the nature of the beast. With Pot Limit Omaha having, higher variance, you're going to get those sort of players. And long term, they're going to be very profitable to play against. It's just sort of reining it in. If we 3-bet here with our aces that have enough flush and are connected, we are going to get an SPR of about 2. So let's try that. Hopefully we get a flop that is reasonable. Needless to say, if either opponent decides to 4-bet, we will be getting stacks in. Right-hand table, we have a spectacularly poor hand in the big blind. Only instance in which this is getting played is if, hypothetically, it goes limp-limp. In which case I have no choice but to check. So we actually squeeze this player out, which is interesting. And the board does favour some sort of rundowns here. Hands like Queen Jack 10-9, 10-9, 8-7. But with an overpair and a nut flush draw, we're just going to be betting and stacking off. Worst case scenario, we're going to have about 40%. There are going to be a decent number of times we are getting it in against worse flush draws. Sometimes a pair chases. It's a pretty awful turn, truthfully. Jack 9 gets there. There are some 2 pairs that get there with an SPR less than 1. However, I think I close my eyes and get it in. Not particularly thrilled by the spot. Hands such as Queen Jack have missed, and we get it through. So the times we don't need to hit our flush in that instance are generally going to be quite good from my point of view. The 7 is a particularly disappointing card. That being said, checking is either allowing a hand that has equity against us to draw out on us, or potentially it's going to go check-check, in which case we are going to lose on a good chunk of non-spade rivers, given we have completely capped our range, have no idea where our opponent is, and are going to have a hell of a job trying to call down. So as disappointing as the turn is, I strongly believe that a lot of the big combo draws, the big straight draws, are just going to have raised flop and got stacks in. So in essence, it's hands like 8-7 that make the weird 2-pair, 10-7 that make the weird 2-pair, and for sure those exist. But the big wraps that I was mentioning almost certainly just play for stacks, given that by 3-betting out of position pre, we're repping aces, and we're going to have aces with a nut flush draw somewhat infrequently. So I really expect those sort of big draws, pair with 13 card straight draw, 17 card straight draw, just to play for stacks on flop. It would be totally standard, totally reasonable. So when it doesn't, it gives me some information about exactly where he is in the hand. Let's try and isolate this player. I can't play cards, seems to be overcalling quite a lot. He's overcalled again, this time out of position. Quite a lot of limps from this gentleman. Pretty awful flop. I mean, it does hit our range, but betting against 2 people with the most limited of backdoor possibilities just seems pretty loose. We've already seen this gentleman limp Queen 10xx. We've seen this guy overcall 4s. So we can't make too many conclusions about that range just because they seem to be, to a certain degree, just random. So it's an unfortunate just give up spot. Ideally we would have been taking his heads up and being able to just sort of probe bet, take it off him. That outcome hasn't happened, so we have to adjust our post-flop play based on the pre-flop action that we have been faced with. So the dream of playing a hand in position with the betting lead against a weaker player has unfortunately died pre-flop, and we have to adjust. Apologies for that popping up. That has been doing it all day and particularly annoying me. Something that I will have to fix in the fullness of time, but I can't seem to manage to fix it right now. Again, folding versus the limp. Totally reasonable. Weakish hand. Ace Queen 10-5. Well, any dreams I had of playing this have probably gone with a limp raise re-raise line. So let's find the fold button again, unfortunately. Joak has overcalled to the surprise of absolutely no one. And this is the scenario I was faced with. If I call, the hand's going 4-way and my hand is ace high, so I'm doing particularly poorly against the actual value 3-bet, 4-bet parts of range. And if I re-raise, I'm very much overplaying my hand. Those are not the hands I was expecting to see. Well, the joy of life is that sometimes you will be surprised. And those are surprising hands to see, I won't lie. King, Queen, 5-4, double suited. It's an acceptable big blind defend. It's going to be an okay raise and cut off from big blind. Trying to play for stacks with it. Seems loosey, to be honest. Seems pretty bad. Actually, Joak had a fairly legitimate hand, albeit very strangely played with his limp. But King, Queen, 10-4 double suited is actually going to perform fairly well in 3-bet spots. But yeah, that is all over the place. So we're going to hit set out on both these tables. So hopefully this four-part series has given some insight into general play at the stakes, and if you're hypothetically trying to run a bankroll up, much like John is in his challenge, how you would go about it, what style you would play, how you would adjust versus certain player types. You know, general sort of views like that. If you're interested in playing on Betfair, it's sort of shown off the standard of competition you would be playing. You can make your own judgments about whether that would be profitable for you or not. So yeah, any questions, comments, feedback, of course, drop them in the either on PokerVIP.com or in the video comment section below. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the 4+ series, and I will see you guys in a bit.